Hey, welcome to episode 5 of Thoughts and Discourses on Digital Transformation. I want to just welcome Mark Miller from Jupiter One. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you, Colin. It's been a while since we've seen each other in person, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a long time. I've been saying that very frequently, and I think we're now getting to the end of this, and we're starting to see more people starting to travel, and
Yeah.
we're starting to see that. So I think it's all in all good that things are returning to normal or pseudo normal because. Even for me, talking about going back into the office, I have a very long commute into New York City, and a lot of people are saying, yeah, instead of going 5 days a week, we're going to start maybe
Hmm.
we'll end up with a 2 or 3 day a week process because people just like having that time. I basically have an extra 3 hours a day. Work seems to have bled into that 3 hours quite a bit, but I think all in all, it's a good process, and it'll probably be a good situation with a better work-life balance and a less commute. So, do you want to introduce yourself? We've known each other for quite some time now,
Yeah.
and just tell everybody what you've been doing. Maybe mention your great all-day DevOps. You're the co-founder there, and
Wow.
and what you're doing now.
I had forgotten about that. It's interesting. I mean, you know me from not just our personal relationship. We worked 2 blocks away. I was on Wall Street and you're on Maiden Lane. Um, but a lot of people would know me from All Day DevOps. It is the world's largest DevOps conference. We do, Derek Weeks and I started that 6 years ago this year. And, we've had as many as 30 or 40,000 people register for an online conference before it was cool to be online doing conferences. So that's one of the things that I'm known for. The other thing is as a community builder. I build large online communities around specific industry verticals. Right now, I'm working with Jupiter One as their senior storyteller, and we are building a community around cyber asset visibility. It's fascinating because I haven't seen anybody do it at the depth of Jupiter One, and that's one of the reasons I came on board. Is that from what you've done in your career that there's millions and millions of cyber assets in a very complex systems like the ones that you run. And how do you gain visibility into those systems? And that's what we are working on. We are working on creating a way that you can actually visualize those assets and the relationships between those assets, which is big because I don't think people talk about that enough. That how cyber assets relate to each other. And we actually have a way to create dynamic graphs so you can expand and contract the graph so you can go micro and macro level within the graph to see what's going on with your cyber assets.
Yeah, it reminds me like probably 10, 15 years ago, a lot of the network and systems management was doing the same thing. People were basically starting to implement all of these networks 20 years ago and then suddenly realized we don't actually know what's on our network. And products like OpenView, and I used to work for Hewlett Packard, were fantastic tools and it allowed you to discover things on your network. And I do remember actually, I went to, it was a military installation in the United States, and we did a discovery, and all of a sudden, it started to discover non-military places, and it looked like a contractor
Yep.
had hooked up their network to the military's network, and there were some scary pieces about that. And it was like, okay, well, this is kind of good news, bad news. You now know about it. It seems like now there's so much focus on cyber. Being able to have visibility on your assets is basically the next generation and the next big wave that needs to happen. Is that what you're seeing in the market?
I am. I think the thing that's happening too, and you've been part of the transition here, is the move to the cloud is making it a whole new ballgame. Because what we're doing, we're old school, right? We used to be able to walk into the server room and physically touch everything. You've got your rack map, you know where everything is, and you can check everything out. In the situation where we're in now, where you've got major hybrid situations where some are on premises and some, a majority of it is on cloud, how in the hell do you get your mind around all of the access points of this stuff? And I think that is the next big wave, as you're talking about. How do you actually visualize? How do you wrap your mind, your company around the idea that you've got all of these access points and you have to secure them, and not only secure them, but understand what the relationships are that, as you were saying, if a third party vendor is in there, we can use Target as an example because that's, the poster child for that. HVAC team comes in and gets access to the point of sale systems. You know, that is discoverable now. That's one of the things that we were working hard on at Jupiter One is, can you actually expose that in advance, not as part of a major noise tsunami coming at you? Because I think that's where Target got lost, right? It was just in a
Right.
tsunami of noise. And everybody said, oh, they were notified. Yeah, they were notified with 60,000 other things too. So,
Right.
yeah, the visibility and the risk assessment as part of that visibility is becoming absolutely critical.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the other aspect with the cloud, and it's really with infrastructure as code that is driving this, is it's very easy now to go and create assets. It's very easy. In 2 minutes, I can get my Terraform script and I can
Yep.
instantiate, 20 new servers because I want to test something or I'm going to do development. I can go and create Lambda functions like crazy, and all of a sudden people forget about this. It's much harder when it was a server. It was a bit easier with a virtual server, but even that, there was a tremendous amount of virtual server sprawl. Now with coding, and I can actually go create a server in the cloud, an EC2 instance, or a Lambda function. It just is exponentially harder to keep track of all these assets. And a lot of people end up driving it actually from a finance perspective, because we suddenly get a bill, and people actually start freaking out. The finance people going, well, this wasn't budgeted. Even I've done that personally, where I instantiated a very large database and I left it running and I forgot to pause it, or I forgot to delete it, and you get the bill. And for a personal bill, it was like, whoa, I need to put some alerts on my Amazon account
Right.
on a daily basis. And so some people actually take it from that perspective, trying to get a picture of it, let alone worrying about the security aspect, which I think is an even bigger risk for companies.
Yeah, the thing as you were talking there, it reminded me of the instances where we've seen EC2 buckets open to the public and they shouldn't have been, right? That that's one of the things. That's just one of the simplistic things that you can think about is not only default credentials that are left open to the public. We saw a breach this week where people actually saw admin credentials exposed on the internet. Um, we need to be aware that there are now being developed systems that will help you manage that. Plethora isn't even the word, it's just, it's so large. It's not manually processed. Not, you can't manually process this anymore. I know you agree with that one, that it's
Right.
like there is absolutely no way that you can do this in a manual way anymore.
Yeah, I think so. I think the automation is driving so many aspects of it. Being able to automatically create the infrastructure, being able to automatically monitor the underlying infrastructure,
Yeah.
and now, from a security perspective, you start to get into this compliance as code, security as code, and everything is actually shifting more on the left. As we start to build this, we have to put the right monitoring in place. We have to put the right security controls on place, and then from an operational perspective, that just feeds into this endless loop, right?
Right, right. it's scary, Colin, because the hydra, the monster that we've created, the complexity of the systems, are way beyond our comprehension anymore. And you hear a lot about AI and a lot about ML, and everybody poo-poos it, but it is the way it's going to get done. I mean, that's the real usage here, right?
Absolutely. Especially, there's no way once you start getting above like a thousand instances of anything that you can have any level of manual processes, right? You have to automate it. And then you need to start to get a good understanding of who's talking to who and why and the constraints around that. And there are certain aspects you can start to do with Amazon. They've got their security hub that looks at the security, and then they have you can create multi-account structures to kind of limit your blast radius. So you can say, hey, this line of business is in this account structure, this other line of business is in a different account structure. So even if there is an issue, you basically are limited to within that account structure. And so there's various techniques, but even within that, it starts to get harder to limit the blast radius unless you have a lot of security monitoring and tools in place.
Yeah, it's interesting you use blast radius because that is coming up more and more often now in conversations I'm having with people. Not only how do you limit it, but how do you even know what it is? You know, because things are so interconnected. How are you discovering where the complexity of the system is hiding stuff from you? And so I don't know how you discover a complete blast radius at this point, but the terminology is being used more and more, so we know that people are more aware of it now, and there's going to be solutions coming. That's one of the things we're working on too.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's kind of timely as well because one of the more critical set of systems is actually the Federal Reserve with their FedWire, their cash
Mm.
application, their ACH applications. And yeah, it was actually on CNBC a couple of weeks ago. Their systems went down. They had a multi-hour outage, and we talk about blast radius. This is ones where you'd want to actually protect each individual system to a high degree, right? FedWire
Right.
does $2 to $4 trillion a day. The ACH system, has got significant volume and transactions. It's really all the ACH transactions either go over the Federal Reserve system or the clearinghouse system. And so once you get into these really systemically important financial utilities, really a focus on reducing this blast radius and having a good focus on security is kind of paramount. And it's just going to get more and more as everything speeds up, with implementations such as real-time payments that I'm involved in, or the Fed equivalent, which would be Fed now. And so I think having a good focus on that is critical, as just everything seems to get faster and faster, right?
You and I have been talking about this for a couple years, but it seems to me from with all the hundreds and hundreds of companies that I talk to, I honestly think that fintech is leading the way on this as far as security is concerned, because the security of the economy counts on it. Not just the security of a single business, the entire United States and the world economy depends now on the fintech industry stepping up and taking control and building security as part of their system, not not at the end point when you're throwing it over the wall to deploy. I mean, that's the old one we used to talk about. But you've got to build security into the system. I think people have bought into that idea, but the issue now is what do you do with the legacy systems? And I know that you had a big thing to a big row to hoe when it came to that. How do you deal with security of legacy systems?
Yeah, and that is a complicated answer, right? It's much easier if you're rewriting a lot of the code, but there's a lot of legacy code out there that is very costly to go and implement and modify and change. So this is one of the things where it's part of your strategic view on how you actually get to things like the cloud, right? Is it a complete lift and shift? I'm
Right.
just going to take my servers and the applications run it, and I'm going to basically do a logical shift to the cloud, or am I going to do some form of transformation, which is either going to be a complete rewrite to move it into like serverless type technologies and microservices, or am I going to take some applications and combine them, or do some form of transformation by taking a look at multiple applications and see what you can do, or am I just going to turn them off because the cost to actually migrate them exceeds the cost of what they were doing and supporting it. I loved talking. There was one company I talked to where they actually had a system that was a membership orientated system for within the company, and they were looking at doing some movement of to the cloud, and basically the cost to actually move it to the cloud exceeded 10 years of the collections that they were making. So they ended up making a decision of, we're just going to make the membership free. We're going to give all these benefits, and we'll just write off the cost, because for us to take this system, move it to the cloud,
Right.
it would cost us so much more. It would take the focus away from developers. It just wasn't worth it. And so that was an example of people turning systems off. Unfortunately, you can't do that with everything. I think a lot of people end up being the decision of, if I lift and shift it to the cloud, what do I do, right? Is there other things I ring fence around these systems? Or if I actually do this transformation and break it into, say, some microservices, and maybe use some Lambda functions, and tie it more closely into the AWS or Azure or GCP platforms,
Hmm.
what am I going to do? So there's these whole range of trade offs that people make, um, and a lot of companies end up having to decide, right? Do I just break everything into containers? Because then I can run them in locally using my internal cloud solution, or I get much more portability, or do I get the time to market by tying myself into a cloud native provider such as AWS and using Lambda functions, and that basically improves my probably overall performance, improves my time to market. But the downside is to try and take say a Lambda function, QuickSight, DynamoDB, or whatever it is, and move it from one cloud provider to another. There's just more work there involved. So are you seeing customers doing the same thing? And how does security come into these discussions as well?
Well, when anybody is talking to us at Jupiter One, they are talking about security. I mean, that's what they look to us for. But I think in the discussion we're having here, and I'm going to jump the track here a little bit, one of the things that's missing is you and I dove directly into the technology itself. We're talking technology here. But anybody who's trying to make this transition that we're talking about has to consider the cultural transformation that has to happen before you even think about starting with the technology. Um, I had a really nice perch in the view of that by reviewing hundreds and hundreds of session submissions for all day DevOps. And when I was looking at the 2017 2018 submissions, there was a shift because previous to that, all the submissions were about technology. And then all of a sudden, 50% were about cultural transformation. I went, holy crap, something just happened. There was a realization. So I'd like to hear you touch on that too, because you were in a very ingrained culture when you were at the reserve. But you
Right.
had to actually work with people to get that cultural transformation to agree for it to happen.
Yeah, you have companies such as organizations such as the Federal Reserve, and there's an awful lot of work that you have to do to on the culture, right? You have to train people about new processes. I remember, actually implementing Agile, and that was a big deal. Even other companies, Agile. A lot of people talk about it, but there's a lot of people who just don't do it very effectively, and
Hmm.
so there's a lot of culture training about that. Even with how do you actually go do build, plan, build, run, right? There's still a lot of organization that I have this monolithic plan. I have this central IT that does the build, and then I have my operations people that do the run. And as you get into more agile and get into DevOps, you actually flip that. So I'm going to have my, say, line of business, and they are going to do a plan, a build, a run. And each line of business will do that. Then you start breaking it down further into saying, well, I'm actually going to have that within a team or a set of teams. Each team is going to do their mini plan, build, run. And that kind of concept is a big shift for people to get their heads around. And there's a lot of people worried about jobs, right? Oh, I've only done operations, I've only done this, to suddenly say, okay, we're going to shift this by 90 degrees. So it's going to be plan, build, run within an organization, and then it's going to be, laser focus within a team. It's a big shift and a lot of culture and a lot of talking about it, saying, you know, this is actually going to be really helpful for the business to be able to do this. And with things like, everything as code, it actually allows you to achieve that. Some people try and do that without the tools in place, and they tend to struggle with that because, unless you have the automation and the visibility and the reporting, it's very
Hmm.
hard to actually achieve that if you don't actually see the metrics and if you can't gather the data. And I'm sure you see that when talking to companies as well.
Yeah. It opens up something that I've talked to Courtney Kistler about it at length. Courtney was the one that did the transformation at Nordstrom's, and then got pulled into Starbucks and did that. Then got pulled into Nike and did that transformation. And she and I talk, periodically once a month just to talk and catch up. And one of the things that she does when she goes into an organization like that, I think you'll like to hear this, is value stream mapping.
Right.
Is that you have to find out where things are happening and then place a value on those processes and focus on the right processes.
Yeah, we actually did a little discussion about that. John Edigar, who I talked to a couple of weeks ago from DXC Technologies, he likes going into customers and doing the whole value stream mapping. And I think that's one of the missing pieces that people forget about is value stream mapping as part of your agile process and DevOps process.
Courtney doesn't think it's just part of it. She thinks it's the beginning of it. That if you're going to walk in and make this transformation and you're talking to engineers, you don't talk about DevOps and DevSecOps and all the buzzwords. You have to work with them in the language that they're going to understand and talk about the systems as they talk about them. And if you can show the value that the systems are providing through this value stream map, then you can get to that Deming and Goldratt principle. Let's find out what's slowing the system down. Let's find out if we can optimize the entire chain, not just pieces of it. And I know where you, I think I know you, where you, I think you know where I'm going with this is that to be able to get a system to work at its optimum, you cannot optimize locally every single part of that system. Not only is it
Right.
impossible, but it is a waste of resources, it's a waste of time if what you're trying to do is optimize the system.
Yeah, yeah. The other aspect that people tend to forget about is the organizational alignment. And I was talking to Tony Matizik from the Matizik Group, and he spends a lot of time focusing on the organizational alignment, because there's big change as we start to automate everything. There's actually a lot of organizational challenges from taking this from a plan, build, run, for example. And there's different organizational models, and the one that people love to talk about, for example, is the Spotify model. And I've talked to companies that have tried to implement the Spotify model, and they haven't actually achieved the benefits because the culture wasn't there, or they didn't really fully understand the purpose of the Spotify model. They just went and
Describe that though,
said,
would
okay,
you? I mean,
everyone's a tribe.
there's a lot of people that won't know what you're talking about. What is the Spotify model?
Okay, Mark, to try and explain the Spotify model, it's just a way of organizing teams of people into groups that kind of make sense to basically make your organization more agile and faster. At the basic level, you have a squad, which is actually a self contained team that's going to work on a piece of functionality. And that would include like the front end, the web. It would include any of the middleware or business logic that you were going to be building, as well as the database. And in that, there would be a scrum master, there would be the testers, the security people, and that team would own everything included in the usual plan, build, run concept that you have. So they would actually decide on the architecture for that piece of functionality they were going to deliver. They would actually go build it, as well as they would actually support it, so that from the operational perspective. And so it's that kind of vertical set of hierarchy that you have within these squads. And you would have multiple squads working on, say, a big application, just like what Spotify has. And they would own a piece of that functionality. Now, you need to have your organization set up and your architecture set up so you'd be able to easily do that. Otherwise, if you have a very monolithic application, it's very hard to break into individual teams that own certain decisions. So you need to really have the right type of application and the right architecture of that application to be able to achieve that. And normally what you have is a product owner for each one of these squads, kind of that helps drive the new functionality. The next layer is actually cuts across all of these different squads, and that's called a chapter. So there's going to be like a user interface chapter, there's going to be a data chapter, etc., etc. Now, these chapters, what they do is really try and help drive consistency across these kind of horizontal layers. So do you really need to have multiple different JavaScript frameworks? When one would do so, they talk about the JavaScript, where they're going with TypeScript, maybe the futures. That's kind of the role of the concept of these chapters. Now, if you have a very large organization, what you can do is actually have another concept called guilds. And guilds tend to work across certain, I think of them more as non-functional areas. So what are we doing from performance monitoring? Well, performance monitoring is not just a JavaScript, not just a database or a Java middleware kind of thing. It kind of cuts across them. Same with test automation or security and vulnerabilities. So you have that kind of concept that goes across that. So you might actually have like a web technology guild or a security guild that would have that. And there's other concepts that go across of that. And once your teams get large enough, you can actually have tribes, which are really focused on big areas of functionality. And so if you have a very large organization, you can think maybe of as tribe as one big line of business or things like that. So there's different areas and different ways of working, and it just tries to really put the plan, build, run model that we have, which is normally plan, then you build, and then you run, actually turns it on its head, where you actually have plan, build, run within a certain team, and a plan, build, run with another team. And that's where you need to have concepts there that help you work with that. So hopefully that makes sense. And probably we need to have a whole different session driving into some of these organizational models.
That's right. I like the way John Willis talks about that crosstalk between those silos. He says that you need somebody who knows how to negotiate to actually be the transformation agent between the silos so that he calls it the liaison. We need a liaison that actually knows how to talk the language of both of those silos and get them, in a sense, to connect and work together in that way. I think the best visualization I've ever seen of that is Michael Wu's work when he was at Lithium. He was the chief research scientist at Lithium, and we had huge discussions about how massive communities are built. And it works the same way in a company too. Is that when a community first starts or an idea is starting to burgeon somewhere, there are small pockets of people that are talking, and it is just small. And then what happens is one person from this one talks to another person here, and then those two get connected. So now you've doubled the network effect. And the more of those small niche groups that you start to connect with through that crosstalk, that's when the big stuff starts to happen.
Yeah, I saw that. It was an interesting model at the Federal Reserve because there's 12 independent banks, right? And what
Mm-hmm.
was fascinating there, they had a yearly conference, and it was just great because you could actually go and talk to a bunch of different groups that you would never have met, never have talked to before. And the whole water cooler effect happened because you would say, well, I'm doing this new UI technology, or we're trying to do this whole CI process using these tools. And they're going, wow, we were thinking about that, or we're doing it. And then you get talking, and then you create this working group. And after we left from that, the training, you would actually walk away and say, okay, let's create a working group. Let's have a monthly call, a weekly call, and it was fantastic because they would go talk to another bank, and all of a sudden you would get this group that started with one, two people, and accidentally having a conversation into actually driving how the Federal Reserve System changed its application development processes and the behavior and the culture. It was I can't underestimate the strength of the this building the community, and especially how you get it going from a grassroots effort. And you probably have the most experience, right, on how you build this kind of grassroots community. And what would you recommend companies do? How would a company encourage that?
It's something that you and I have talked about in passing that we haven't quite pulled off yet. Is that if I was to put together a private roundtable, let's use banks as an example. I mean, we all know the guys that have our positions at the various banks. You knew everybody at Citi, you know everybody, that kind of thing. What would actually make this actually work the way you just described it is get somebody like me to be a broker and say, look, I've got this place. We can all sit down. I'll cater in lunch. We're going to lock the doors and we're going to talk as an industry with each other. Oh, we've actually done a couple of these, by the way, and it's fantastic. And so what happens is nobody's going to give away their secret sauce. That's not what we're there for. What we're there
Right.
for is to look at that 80% that we all have in common to see if there are patterns that we're recognizing and talk to each other and say, yeah, I have seen that before. And then exchange war stories. That's where the Epic Failures books came from. I mean, you saw the Epic Failures. Is that if we can get people to talk about how they failed,
Right.
that's pretty good, right?
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. The epic failures in DevOps series that you've done is great because I think you actually probably get a bit more learning and more information about when somebody's actually failed than when they're touting their successes because they tend not to talk about all the bumps that they've delivered. But when somebody's brave enough to talk about a complete failure that they've had, and then be able to say this is how we failed and then this is how we recovered, I think it is a great case study on an improved learning model.
I want to give you some background on how that started. The first Epic Failures in DevSecOps book started over. I think I was in Sydney because Rob Englund was there and DJ Schleen was there and a couple people that I'm just visualizing now. And we just started telling war stories about how we completely hosed a project. And everybody started laughing. And DJ turned to me and said, "Somebody needs to put these into a book." And I said, "Done."
Right.
So we got 9 authors sitting around the table, and they each wrote a chapter. And the thing about it is, I like the way that you're visualizing it too, is you learn much more from failure than you do success. Success makes you think you know how to do it.
Right.
But if you're reading, if you can learn from failure stories and you can self-identify, that's the big purpose of those books, is you need to be able to read through and identify, oh, that's me. That's where I am right now. And DJ's telling me where I shouldn't be going. Now that's a cool process.
Yeah, and I think that's where the series got a lot of traction, right? You had multiple copies or revisions of the book. I think there's probably going to be more epic failures in security. The trouble is, are people going to be brave enough to talk about some of their bigger security failures? There's big ones that are well publicized, like Target, but there's actually these mini failures or near misses that I think are very valuable lessons for people to come across and to say, how did I recover from that? Do you see the same thing?
I like that idea. I've got a new theme for a new book. Near misses.
Well, hopefully it
It,
won't be a chapter, but you never know.
the thing that we're trying to do is encourage peer-to-peer communication and exchange because
Right.
that's where the real things start to happen. If and I use fintech as an example because we've worked in that industry a lot, and I think it's leading the charge, as I said before. But I guarantee you that the CISOs of those banks are having beers or dinner talking to each other. They're doing the water cooler thing at conferences, which we can't do now, but they're finding a way to do that because there's too much value left on the table if you're not talking to your peers.
Right. So, what do you think the future is with DevOps? Are we at the start of it? Are we going to evolve into something else? Right? We went from waterfall to iterative to agile to DevOps. Do we have a long road on DevOps, or are we going to evolve into another set of processes?
Or you skipped Agile waterfall. I've talked with Patrick Dubois about this, and you might know Patrick. He's the grandfather of DevOps. He's the one that started it in Ghent in Belgium. And one of the things, and I agree with him, is that the terminology, the word DevOps and DevSecOps, that's going to disappear. It's just going to be part of a process. And
Right.
Patrick has grown way, way beyond that original conception of DevOps because he sees that methodology should be used not to just run technology, but to run the business itself. Every aspect of the business should be using these patterns to to make it work properly. So my answer to your direct question is the words are going to disappear, but the processes that are going to be used are going to be underlying the foundation of how we're moving forward.
Yeah, I like the concept that you raised, is this is just a pattern, and the pattern moves from just technology orientated to the whole business. Because I think a lot of times the business is not collecting the right set of metrics, is not getting that
Mhm.
feedback loop, is not truly understanding all of the ramifications of the investment, the marketing, and so taking that pattern and applying it across the business, I think would be very valuable. And I think that the companies that really are going to excel at it are going to probably be the ones that are most successful.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. As I say, I give credit to Patrick in that discussion when we were talking about it. It's something he thinks about a lot. And when you think about somebody that actually created a movement with his peers, and now stepping back from that movement and saying, we're moving beyond that now, that's a powerful statement.
I think we're about out of time. So, Mark, I just want to thank you very much. Very much appreciate it. And hopefully, at some point, we'll actually get to meet face to face again. Any parting thoughts that you can give our audience?
I think one of the things, and I want to make clear here, is that as we're moving forward, one of the most important things that we can do as any industry in technology, and I think every business is a technology business now. They just happen to be selling airline tickets or giving money through ATMs. That there has to be automated visibility and alerting built into your system in order for it to be secure. I mean, we could go on that topic for an hour by itself, but that's where I would leave it. How are you visualizing your cyber assets? And how are you visualizing the interconnectedness with those assets to actually do a real risk assessment and notification? I think that's where I'd like to see things moving.
Okay, well, great conversation. Really appreciate it. Thanks, Mark.